Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! It's the fourth Sunday of Advent, which we more often call Christmas Sunday, the Sunday before the day of Jesus' birth. And today I want to tell you a story of a Christmas miracle. Diane and I spent 12 years living and working in the Philippines. It's the other language that I've learned to speak. And we became very close friends with many Filipinos. One of the things that they are noted for is their ability to adapt. And they have worked all over the world in different capacities in order to earn income to help their families back home. And one of the countries where Filipinos have worked significantly over the years is Saudi Arabia. There they make good wages, and they save most of it and send it back to their families back home in the Philippines. And because of that, there are many expatriates who are Christians there. Over the years, the different embassies, like the U.S. Embassy, UK Embassy, and others, had Sunday services on the compounds of their embassies for some time. And then the authorities, because of pressure by the religious police called the Mutawa in the country, because it is dominantly a Muslim country, for 1,400 years there has been no official church building in that country. And the embassies were forced to shut down their Sunday services on their compounds that they held, even though they were mostly just for embassy staff and other Christians who lived and worked in the country. My story today is about a Filipino brother named Wally Magdangal. Wally was married, and he and his wife went to work in Saudi Arabia. In fact, what happened was his wife got a job, and that enabled him to accompany her as her spouse. And his main purpose for being there was to pastor a church of those who were Christians in the country of Saudi Arabia. He was able to secure a villa, like a large house. And they were able to raise enough money to pay 2 years advance rent. The owner was a Muslim, but he had traveled the world. He had seen the rest of the world, and he knew that these Christians who would meet in his house would be very careful and quiet and not likely cause any problems. And so he agreed to rent the villa to Pastor Wally. And for 7 years, Wally pastored a church on that compound. Now, they had to be very secretive about their comings and goings. They had to park their cars a distance away and walk in, and they would walk in 10 minutes apart, each one. They had a special code for getting in the door, in the gate, and they were very, very careful. They had read about the Christians in China during the Cultural Revolution, who had such incredible pressures on them that they were afraid to even sing out loud lest they be discovered. And so they would mouth the words of songs together as opposed to singing. Well, Wally says, we Filipinos could never do that. We're far too expressive. And so what they did was they soundproofed the house so that no one outside could hear their singing and their music and their instruments at the top of their lungs and at the loudest voice. But many local people, through the witness of Christians who worked in Saudi Arabia, became interested in Christianity and began asking if they could attend the services. They were very careful about who they allowed to do that. And one of those people ultimately betrayed them. And one day, Wally was abducted. Now, he was not arrested officially. And it's partially because his wife worked for very high-level people who were very, very well connected at the highest levels of leadership in the country of Saudi Arabia. And they knew that if they were going to get Wally, they were going to literally have to abduct him, and that's what they did. And he was taken away to prison. And every day in prison, he was interrogated and he was tortured. He says the main reasons were they wanted him, one, to deny his faith in Jesus Christ, and two, the parallel part of it was to convert to Islam. And if he was willing to do that, he would have been released and everything would be fine. But of course, Wally was a committed Christian. There's no way they were going to get him to do that. And they also wanted him to tell them where the other Christians met and lived in the country. They just wanted to know everything they could about those who called themselves Christians in their land. And of course, Wally knew of other secret meeting places as well, that there was no way he was going to share that. But because he wouldn't share it, he was tortured just about every day. And on the worst night that he remembers, he was taken into a special room, a torture chamber, as he describes it. He was beaten so badly, especially on the bottom of his feet, that he could not stand up. It was just almost impossible in the pain that was caused by being so badly beaten. And he said when they threw him back into his little cell, he had a very small, like a 3x4 cell that they kept him in, and they kept him, of course, in chains and in leg shackles so that he could never run away. So he lived all of his time in prison with shackles and chains. And when they threw him back into his room that night, he said his body looked like an eggplant. And I think you have a very good word picture there. Well, that night, after being beaten so badly, he was almost ready to throw in the towel. I mean, and part of it was this. He and his wife had one little girl, and they were constantly threatening him that they were going to harm his wife and his little daughter. And that was more than he could bear. And there were times when he was almost ready to give up and to give in. And this night was one of them. But he said, suddenly in his cell, there was a bright light, much like the shepherds saw on the night of Jesus' birth. And he said it was God's glory that was shone into his room. And he said the Lord literally felt like he said it felt like he came and sat beside me and put his arm on my shoulder and said, my son, I see what you're going through. I understand what you're experiencing. And just know that I am with you and I will always be with you. And Wally said that was such an encouragement. It was such an incredible, special appearance of God to him in his cell. And so he said he went to sleep, and just a few hours later, he woke up early morning, and he said he was absolutely shocked, because as he looked at his body, there were no bruises, as there had been when he went to sleep. There were no cuts. There was no blood. There was nothing to show that he had been mistreated so badly as he had. He said, I was totally whole and healed. He said, it was the miracle of God's presence with me. And so that encouraged Wally tremendously. On December 22, he was able to have a meeting with his wife and daughter. Now, they were on two sides of a fence. They weren't able to touch each other in any way, but they could see each other. His daughter did not even recognize him because he was so emaciated from his time in prison. But as they were leaving that day on December 22, they were crying because Wally had been sentenced to death by execution. Executions in Saudi Arabia are usually carried out publicly. Many people can watch. And they do it usually on Friday after prayers. Friday is their special worship day in the Muslim world. And after morning prayers, they have a public execution of people who are, some of them are true criminals and have somehow violated Muslim law, or Sharia, as they call it. And Wally had been sentenced to death by execution. And it was to be a Friday, and that year, Christmas was on a Friday, just like it is this year. And so on December 25th, he was going to be publicly executed for his crime of pastoring a secret house church in Saudi Arabia. On the 22nd, as I mentioned, he meets his wife and daughter. His wife is a very strong believer, and she has connections. She sent a letter to the president of the Philippines, Fidel Ramos. Diane and I met Mr. Ramos when he was the head of the military of the country, when we were at FEBC Radio. One day they dedicated a new studio in the radio station to the memory of his mother, who was an outstanding Christian. And Fidel Ramos came in his helicopter and all his bodyguards, and we got to meet Mr. Ramos, who later became the president of the Philippines at this time. And so Wally's wife sent a letter to Mr. Ramos telling him the sad situation of her husband and asking him to plead with the king of Saudi Arabia for clemency for her husband, which apparently he did, as well as others who she knew, because she worked in a household of people who were very high up in the contacts they had with the leadership of the country. So as she was leaving on December 22nd, she turned to Wally just as she's going out the door, and she said, "God has told me that you are going to be released before midnight tomorrow night on December 23rd. And she said bye-bye, and she walked out the door. Well, Wally was flabbergasted, like, I'm going to be released? I mean, I'm supposed to be executed. That's, and all day the 23rd, he just couldn't get that out of his head. It was just going through his head constantly. And he waited and waited, and late that night, something happened. And we happened to have a short video clip of Wally sharing with an interviewer what happened that night. And this is what Wally has to say.
And then I prayed. I said, Lord, you remember my prayer, Lord, when I got saved? When I got saved, Rashid, I prayed to God and I said, Lord, please use me any which way you want to, and send me anywhere you wish. And I will serve you with all my heart, my soul, and my strength, and I'll do it with great passion all the days of my life. And I repeated that prayer that night in prison. And while I was saying that prayer, it was close to midnight. Officers came into the hallway. And when that happens, in the midnight hour in prison, we are all like scared. Nobody's sleeping. We pretend to sleep, but we're scared. Why? Because when the officers show up at midnight, a prisoner, or one or two or three or four, no matter how many, will be taken out to prepare them for the execution. They'll be tortured, they'll be prepared for the execution. And they all came to my cell. They stopped in front of my cell. And I'm a nervous wreck now. And my door opens, and a general walks into my inside. He did not call me outside. Usually they'll ask you to come outside. And normally, the highest ranking officer that would show up would be a major or a captain or a lieutenant. But that night, it was a general. And he did not call me out. He went inside my cell. And he began to jab my heart with his huge finger. He said, he asked me my name, so I gave him my name. And then he said, "Are you the pastor of the underground church?" I said, "Yes, sir." The third question he asked me, Rashid, he said, "Tell me, what in the world is going on?" And he's doing this to my chest, my heart. He's tall. "What in the world is going on?" He was mad. And I said, "You tell me. How can I say anything when I was isolated from the world? You tell me what's going on." I started to have tears. And then he suddenly smiled. He said, "About half an hour ago, I was awakened by a call from the royal palace. His Majesty has given orders that I should get up from my sleep and wear my official uniform with my rank and my nameplate. I had to look like an official officer in the prisons of Arabia." He was the general in charge of the prisons. He said, "Did you know that I have other officers under me? I could call them and they would go and obey my command. But did you know it was the king himself who said I should be the one? I should go out and look for a man on death row named Wally." He was upset because of that. I could have easily called somebody else to do it, but he wanted me to do it. And then he said, "I want you to know this. The king said I should look for you and process your release from the death sentence, from death row, before 12 midnight tonight, December 23. When he said that, Rashid, I remembered my wife. It was ringing all over every day. I mean, the entire day. Before 12 midnight, December 23, you will be set free. Bye-bye. And then the general said this, "Preacher, we're giving you 5 minutes." See, the 5 minutes the day before was my last visit with my wife and my child. And now the general says, "I'm giving you 5 minutes. We're getting you out. Say goodbye to your friends in prison." At this time, all the cell doors were opened and prisoners stepped out. They were ordered to step out, lining the corridors. I walked by every hallway, greeting my fellow prisoners, and there were tears. I was in tears. That night before 12 midnight, I was rushed into the same prison courtyard where I was the day before. And inside the prison courtyard was a police car, a squad car waiting for me. And they threw me in the back seat and sped off before 12 midnight. And I look back. You remember earlier I said I looked back when they abducted me, I looked back to the villa where I used to live and had church services.
Right.
But this time I look back, and behind me was the prison, the main prison of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. But behind those walls, I have left a witness for Christ. I have led some prisoners to Christ. Some of the guards heard me worshiping the Lord. Behind the walls of prison, somehow there was light. Light came upon darkness. Light came upon those who were in dark prison cells. God would use me. A candle, a tiny candle flickering in darkness. But you know something, Rashid? Although it was dark in prison, God showed me no amount of darkness in this world can cut the light or remove the light that flickers from a solitary candle that burns for Jesus. I have good and bad memories of that prison. But I have a lot of praise reports because Jesus walked with me and stayed with me throughout my incarceration.
Wally was taken to the airport after being released from prison around midnight on the 23rd of December. And on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, he was put on an airplane and sent to the Philippines. A couple of days later, his wife and daughter would join up with him. But he arrived home in Manila on December 25, the day that he had been scheduled to be executed publicly in Saudi Arabia. It was another Christmas miracle. And thank God for those miracles that have occurred from the beginning of the first Christmas, when God sent his only Son into the world to become human flesh in order to be the one who would pay the penalty for our sin on the cross. Thank you, Lord, for Christmas and Christmas miracles that we experience. So, to you and yours, I wish you a Merry Christmas.